22nd, 2002.
They all live in the same town. What about the sanctity of the marriage vows?
This was so centrally who I was that I could hardly exist that way.
I believe people are born with a sexual drive, but as to what that drive is aimed at, I think that's primarily learned.
What happened after 10 years?
Somehow the weight of living a lie daily, knowing basically who I was and what I was like, but pretending to be different, became more than I really could handle very well.
Was change in the other direction a possibility?
I don't believe I changed. I think I found out who I was.
Tonight, a matter of choice. 2 families and the prosecutor.
From ABC News, this is Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
We don't often acknowledge it, but the way that gays behave, where and how they meet, the heterosexual fronts that many of them adopt, that sort of behavior is rarely voluntary. More often, it's the direct outgrowth of our attitudes toward them. If most gays tend to conceal their homosexuality, it's because the price of coming out frequently entails the loss of friendships, families, employment. If their behavior is often furtive, if they gravitate toward gay bars and clubs, if they seek one another out in the isolated corners of public parks, it is because society in general labels them as pariahs and obliges them to act as such. It's quite extraordinary to discover how many gays enter into conventional marriages, have children, raise families, only because the price of revealing who and what they are is simply too exorbitant, until at some point or another, most of them simply can't maintain the masquerade any longer. Fear is a constant part of the equation. They're afraid of us. We're afraid of them. In the course of this program, you'll meet 2 families on either side of that divide. But first, we want you to meet a former Commonwealth attorney, Virginia's equivalent of a district attorney. His job was to prosecute those who broke the law, including, of course, the state's sodomy law.
I grew up in Roanoke in the 40s and 50s. Quite frankly, I didn't really know that there was an alternative to living alone for the rest of your life or getting married in a heterosexual marriage.
So Sam married, had children, pursued a successful legal career. Knew you were gay when you got married?
Yes, knew I was gay from the time of puberty.
Did you cheat on her while you were married?
Yes.
From the very beginning?
No, not for a long time.
How long is a long time?
10 years.
What happened after 10 years?
Somehow the weight of living a lie daily, knowing basically who I was and what I was like, but pretending to be different, became more than I really could handle very well.
Before he ever acted on that knowledge, Sam Garrison had become a Commonwealth attorney, Virginia's equivalent of a district attorney.
I was attending a Commonwealth Attorneys Convention at the Cavalier Hotel.
It was the middle of the night. He left his wife in a hotel bed to go out for some Pepto-Bismol.
I do remember the young man. And I invited him in the car. And it was like an assumed thing. I'd never done it. I don't know whether he had or not. So we just drove around a little bit and into a secluded place and parked the car and got in the back seat and committed felonies very joyously.
Sam remembers prosecuting gays under Virginia law for the very things he had done. Did you feel like a hypocrite at that time?
I think sometimes I did, but it wasn't the predominant feeling I had, because my conscience is fairly clear. I didn't lean on gay people. In other words, I didn't make a point of embarrassing or trying to make an example. are really leaning on the gay defendants.
We'll come back to Sam Garrison a little later. Not everyone's conflict is quite as complicated as his, but as we'll see, there's always a conflict.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by MasterCard.
To be my guide through this labyrinth of a relationship that you got here. Who's who to whom?
Who's who to whom? Well, Mary is John Thomas's birth mother,
Right.
and I'm his other mother.
Bless you. May I ask you, who's the father of your child?
We used artificial insemination by anonymous donor.
So you don't know. Don't know, don't need to know, don't want to know.
Right.
Makes no difference.
Virginia, like all U.S. states, does not recognize same-sex marriage. Instead, Jenny West and Mary Turner held a commitment ceremony last May.
Jenny's father did the benediction. My father sang a song. Her mother cooked brunch for everybody involved. It was quite a family event, and we had a great time. I cried through half of it.
Jenny used to be married to a man.
For how long?
Almost 20 years.
Why? Why for 20 years?
Two reasons. My husband was a very good person. I was not aware of myself being a lesbian until much later in life.
Jenny and her husband had 2 children together. Those boys now live with Jenny and Mary.
Kind man, isn't he? You loved him? Felt, when you first married, you felt for him the things that a woman feels for a man? You thought or you knew as you look back on it now?
I have some questions as I look back on it now.
I mean, what? A certain awkwardness or a certain...
Awkwardness, probably not feeling fully what many people feel. Probably caring more about the person than the sexual relationship. Always feeling a sense of something missing.
She went into therapy and over time came to the conclusion that she is a lesbian.
But what about the sanctity of the marriage vows?
And that's not something I take lightly. So it's not something that I dismissed or left easily at all. It was very, very painful. What I finally discovered was this was so centrally who I was that I could hardly exist that way. The notion of trying to live as if it wasn't there began to be pretty impossible.
So eventually she divorced. 3 years later, she met Mary, a graphic artist, at a church picnic.
Just talk about what life is like. I think people initially expect it to be so different for 2 women living together, small child.
I think it is so normal, it's boring. Because I was thinking about that the other day as we had an argument about changing room arrangements and furniture. You know, that's what everybody goes through. It's just pretty much routine.
A professor of social work, Jenny sees students on campus struggling, as she once did.
I have certainly worked with several who have been very rejected by their families, to the point where the family completely pulled away all support for their college education, took away the car.
What do the families expect them to do?
They expect them to change. That's very fundamentally the expectation.
Well, in a sense, you did. I mean, you did it the other way around. You lived your heterosexual life for many years, almost a generation.
Yes.
And then changed. Is change in the other direction a possibility?
When I talk with people and students about, well, how do people become homosexual and is it a choice, I don't believe I changed. I think I found out who I was.
You know, of course, that many religions, your own in particular, loves that phrase about hate the sin but love the sinner.
Yes.
And the argument is always made, we don't hate you for being gay, we don't even hate you for acting upon it, but we hate the act of your acting upon it. You're the daughter of a Baptist minister. These terms, these notions, these concepts cannot be alien to you.
Jesus taught love and unconditional love for your fellow person. And in the end, that's what Christianity is about.
Did it ever occur to you, since it is so widely described, usually with that terrible word, an abomination? Has that ever given you pause?
No.
You never
It's
saw
given
it
me
that way.
sadness about the many, many people who hold that belief and then use that belief and they lose their family members in the process.
When we come back, another Roanoke family and its beliefs. Like many parents raising teenagers, David and Debbie Musselman have worried about homosexual influences, even from those closest to home.
We love gay people. We have two of them in our family that we love dearly, but it does not negate the fact that we think what they're doing is morally repugnant.
You mentioned a couple of your family members are gay. And you've also expressed the fear that in some instances, gays are responsible for influencing particularly young people into their own lifestyle.
I happen to believe that all men are born sinners. And I think we're all fully capable of doing all kinds of things that maybe we don't even plan to do. And so it was a major concern for me when they were little. And I was determined that they would not have close relationships with our kids, especially our boys, but our kids.
You realize what you're saying, though? I mean, when you say we are all born sinners,
Yes,
then that would clearly apply to heterosexuals as well as homosexuals.
absolutely.
But I take it you didn't take the same precautions with heterosexual members of your family. No,
Actually, we did. We're very careful who our children...
no, I'm talking about family members here.
I am too.
I guess one reason I believed this so strongly was when I was a little kid, in the neighborhood, there were some kids playing doctor. And I remember very clearly, I didn't get into it far, but I got into it far enough to think that at that point in time, I felt no more draw to one sex than the other. Given the proper, or improper, however you want to look at it, circumstances and surroundings, I think I could very easily have been pushed into it at that point.
You think that if a gay man at that point had taken you under his wing, that you would have been gay today?
I think that's very possible.
Given that experience, you can imagine how they felt when 16-year-old son Josh came home with this tale.
My friend, she had another friend from a different school who claimed to be gay, and he told her that he thought, quote, he thought I was hot, and it didn't make me feel too well as a guy.
Brother DJ, 17.
Definitely, I feel a whole lot more pressure from the homosexual population. Just to shut up, because you might offend somebody.
The Musselmans actually feel under siege, so much so that they debated even giving this interview.
The homosexual establishment has done a tremendous job of portraying themselves as victims or martyrs, and when in fact, oftentimes, I believe it's middle America that becomes a victim of the militant homosexuals.
I was concerned that what we believe and what we say might not come across correctly.
It's a subject where you can't talk in a normal, objective way, because if there's such a risk of immediately being labeled as a bigot or a homophobe or a Nazi or whatever.
A former concert pianist, David Musselman, is now organist at Roanoke's First Baptist Church.
Everybody needs to know about the redemptive grace that God makes available. I believe that we're all sinners, and there is a way of escape.
The idea of escape is rooted in their belief that homosexuality is a choice.
I believe people are born with a sexual drive, but as to what that drive is aimed at, I think that's primarily learned.
We've talked to a lot of gays for this series. Very few, if any, who I think would ever argue that their life has been anything but difficult. Why would anybody choose that lifestyle?
I think the drives that we have, the sexual drive, is the strongest one that we have. They say, for example, I am the way I am because this is how God made me. I don't think the issue is what your sexual proclivity is, what sex that you're drawn to. I think the issue is, are you going to live a chaste lifestyle?
But you're laying down a somewhat tougher standard for gays. Since we, as a culture, deny gays the right to get married, since we, as a culture, judge them if they have casual sex with one another, basically what you're saying is, if you're gay, the only way that you're going to be able to lead a chaste life is to lead a totally chaste life. In other words, never have sex. Well, you might be surprised to learn, maybe not, that most of the middle-aged and older gay men and women that I've met were married, have children, and the older ones have grandchildren. And they did it because they were trying to abide by what they saw, the standards of our culture to be. And after 10 years or 15 years, or in some cases 20 and 25 years, they just found they couldn't be something that they felt they weren't meant to be. If they can't find, living with a person of the opposite sex, if that just holds no magic for them at all, that's what you're telling me?
I think part of where the rub comes is we have a different view of life to start with, what it's all about, where it's going, and why. The fact is, when I became born again, what seemed to be bondage, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this, has instead given me a freedom that I would not have suspected. And so what I'm living for is the day when I see him and he says, David, you did a good job. And if that means not being with anybody else, or if that means not practicing the gay lifestyle, or whatever it is, that's enough.
In a moment, we'll come back to that former prosecutor, now out of the closet and proud.
To receive a daily email announcement about each evening's Nightline and a preview of special broadcasts, log on to the Nightline page at abcnews.com.
The gays who cruise for company here in Wasena Park know that they can be arrested for what they're contemplating. They know, too, that families like this one picnicking in the park are made uncomfortable by their presence.
No, just the things that was going on down here.
But you're talking about that this is a place where gays get together.
Whatever, yeah.
Whatever. Yeah. So it's just not the kind of place where
you don't want to bring children here and let them loose by themselves. You're afraid if you don't keep them right with you.
We received a number of complaints from people in the community in terms of sexual activity in the park. People who took their kids to the park to play found condoms used and wrappers in the play areas.
Sam Garrison hates the suggestion that gays are more likely than straight men to molest children.
If I'm not mistaken, in modern times we've learned so much about how many straight men molest their own daughters, that you can't sustain any longer this notion that somehow gay men are pedophiles to a degree or an extent that straight men are not.
Society, says Garrison, pushes gays into dark corners and then condemns them for lurking there.
Society doesn't honor the notion of gay marriage and then gives gay people hell for promiscuity. A little contradictory. Society pressures people to slink around, gay people, to slink around in the dark, not to show themselves as they really are, and then, of course, gets very upset because one of the ways that they then express themselves is finding secluded places.
Sam Garrison has been fighting Virginia's sodomy law in the courts for years. Last July, the state Supreme Court refused to hear the case, and he ended his legal challenge to the Wasena Park convictions. Tomorrow, gay and lesbian teenagers growing up and coming out in the Bible Belt.
I was faced with harassment by different students at school, and I just got tired of it, basically, and I had to stop going.
I was put in the hospital for major depression and suicidal thoughts and tendencies.
I was not able to graduate because I was kicked out of the house when Mom and Dad found out.
I love women. I love being with them. There's something about that I can't find, and I dated guys before.
That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
This has been a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.